I never thought a portable space heater would become the most important piece of equipment in my entire house. But when you live in Minnesota during January, you learn to respect anything that produces warmth. My name is Nathan Xavier, and I have been living in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision in Bloomington, Minnesota, for 3 years now. The neighborhood looked perfect when I bought my house. Well-maintained lawns, friendly neighbors, and homes that actually had character instead of looking like cookie-cutter boxes. What I didn't realize was that the homeowners association would become the bane of my entire existence, and that their ridiculous rules would nearly cost me everything I owned. It started in early December, when I decided to install a backup heating system in my basement. My main furnace was getting old, about 15 years at that point, and I had been hearing some concerning noises coming from it. Nothing catastrophic, just little clicks and groans that made me nervous. Minnesota winters are no joke. We are talking about temperatures that regularly drop below zero, and wind chills that can literally kill you if you are stuck outside for too long. So I went to Home Depot and bought a high-quality portable electric heater, the kind designed for large spaces. It cost me about $400, had multiple safety features including automatic shutoff if it tipped over, and could heat my entire basement and first floor if needed. I also purchased a backup generator and had an electrician come out to make sure everything was properly set up and safe. The electrician, a guy named Tom who had been working in Bloomington for 20 years, assured me that my setup was not only safe but actually pretty smart given Minnesota's harsh winters. You would be surprised how many people do not think about backup heat, Tom said as he checked the wiring. Then their furnace goes out at 2 in the morning when it is -20 outside, and they are calling emergency services panicking. I felt pretty good about my decision. I had spent about $1,200 total on the backup system, but it seemed like a reasonable investment for peace of mind. The generator sat in my garage, properly ventilated and ready to go. The space heater was in my basement, plugged into a dedicated circuit, positioned away from anything flammable. That is when Karen Jenkins got involved. Karen was the president of the Meadowbrook Heights HOA, and she took her position more seriously than most people take actual jobs. She was in her early 50s, always dressed like she was about to attend a country club luncheon, and had this way of smiling at you that made it clear she was not actually happy to see you. Her blonde hair was always perfectly styled, and she drove a white Lexus SUV that she parked diagonally across 2 spaces in front of the community center. I first encountered her authority when she knocked on my door on a Saturday morning in mid-December. I was still in my pajamas, drinking coffee and watching the Vikings game when I heard the sharp rap on my door. "Good morning, Nathan," she said when I opened it, her smile not reaching her eyes. "I hope I am not disturbing you." "Just watching the game," I said. "What can I do for you?" "I am here on official HOA business," she said, pulling out a tablet from her expensive-looking purse. "It has come to our attention that you have been making unauthorized modifications to your property." I blinked at her. "Unauthorized modifications? I bought a space heater." "And a generator," she added, tapping on her tablet. According to Section 7, Paragraph 12 of the HOA bylaws, any permanent or semi-permanent installation of heating, cooling, or power generation equipment must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee before installation. "It is not permanent," I said. "It is a portable heater. I can literally pick it up and move it, and the generator is in my garage." Karen's smile got tighter. "The bylaws are very clear, Nathan. Any equipment that could be considered part of your home's infrastructure requires approval. I am going to need you to submit an application to the committee, and until that application is approved, the equipment needs to be removed from the premises. Removed? I felt my temper starting to rise. Karen, it is December in Minnesota. I have a backup heating system in case my main furnace fails. That is not a modification. That is common sense. The rules exist for everyone's safety and to maintain property values, she said, her voice taking on that condescending tone that made me want to slam the door in her face. I am sure you understand. I will need confirmation that the equipment has been removed by next weekend, or we will have to assess fines. How much in fines? I asked. $50 per day until compliance is achieved, she said cheerfully. Have a wonderful weekend, Nathan. She walked away before I could respond, her heels clicking on my driveway. I stood there in my doorway, cold air pouring into my house, absolutely stunned. $50 a day for having a space heater. It was insane. I called my neighbor, Mike, who had lived in the neighborhood for 8 years. He was a contractor, a straight-talking guy in his 40s who had always been friendly and helpful. Yeah, Karen is something else, Mike said when I told him what happened. She tried to fine me last year because my Christmas lights were not the approved white color. Said multicolored lights were tacky and decreased property values. What did you do? I asked. I took them down, he admitted. It was not worth the fight. The HOA has lawyers, Nathan. They can make your life miserable if they want to. But I was not ready to back down. The bylaws Karen mentioned were clearly meant for things like installing a new HVAC system or building an addition, not for having emergency backup equipment. I spent the next few days reading through the entire HOA agreement, all 67 pages of dense legal language. Buried in Section 19, I found a clause about emergency safety equipment. It stated that homeowners had the right to maintain emergency safety equipment without prior approval, as long as said equipment met local building codes and safety standards. My setup definitely qualified. I had permits from the city for the electrical work, and everything was up to code. I typed up a formal response to the HOA, citing the specific section and paragraph, and hand-delivered it to Karen's house that Thursday evening. She answered the door in yoga pants and a sweater, clearly not expecting visitors. Nathan, she said, her surprise quickly morphing into annoyance. I told you the process. You need to submit an application. And I am citing Section 19, Paragraph 4 of the same bylaws, I said, handing her my letter. Emergency safety equipment is exempt from the approval process. My backup heating system qualifies. She took the letter but did not read it. The Architectural Review Committee will determine what qualifies as emergency equipment. The bylaws do not say that, I countered. They say equipment that meets local safety codes and is intended for emergency use is exempt. I have all the permits and documentation. We will be in touch, she said and closed the door. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The following Tuesday, I received a certified letter from the HOA's law firm. They were demanding that I remove the equipment immediately and pay $1,500 in fines for non-compliance, plus legal fees. The letter claimed that my interpretation of Section 19 was incorrect, and that the emergency equipment clause only applied to things like fire extinguishers and smoke detectors, not heating systems. I was furious. I called 3 different lawyers in the Twin Cities area, but they all basically told me the same thing. Fighting an HOA is expensive and time-consuming, and even if I won, I would probably spend more on legal fees than the fines would cost. One lawyer, a woman named Patricia who specialized in property law, was at least sympathetic. HOAs have a lot of power, she explained. They can put liens on your property if you do not pay their fines, And Karen Jenkins has a reputation. She has taken 4 homeowners to court in the last 3 years. Did she win? I asked. Twice, Patricia said. The other 2 cases settled. Look, my advice is to remove the equipment, submit the application, and try to get it approved through the proper channels. It is not fair, but it is probably your best option. I did not want to hear that, but I also did not have thousands of dollars to spend on a legal battle, so I did what Karen wanted. I unplugged the space heater and put it in my garage next to the generator. I submitted the application to the Architectural Review Committee, filling out their ridiculous 7-page form that asked questions like what color the equipment was and whether it would be visible from the street. The committee met once a month. I submitted my application on December 20th. Their next meeting was not until January 15th. That meant I would be without my backup heating system for nearly a month, right in the middle of the coldest part of winter. It will be fine, I told myself. The furnace has been working okay. It will last. Christmas came and went. I spent it with my sister's family in St. Paul, grateful to get away from Meadowbrook Heights for a few days. The temperature dropped steadily after the holiday. By New Year's Eve, we were looking at daytime highs of 5 degrees and nighttime lows of -15. The weather forecasters kept talking about a polar vortex that was going to sweep down from Canada in mid-January. On January 10th, 5 days before the HOA meeting, my furnace started making a grinding noise. It was around 9 at night. I was in my living room reading when I heard it, a deep, mechanical grinding that sounded like metal scraping against metal. I ran downstairs and checked the furnace. The grinding continued for about 30 seconds, then stopped. The furnace kept running, pushing warm air through the vents, but I knew something was wrong. The next morning, I called a heating repair company. They could not send anyone until the following week because they were completely swamped with emergency calls. The temperature had dropped to -8 overnight, and apparently half of Bloomington's furnaces were failing. If it is still heating, you should be okay for a few days, the dispatcher told me. Just keep an ear on it. If it stops blowing warm air, call us back and we will put you on the emergency list. That night, the grinding got worse. It was lasting longer, sometimes up to a minute, and the warm air coming from the vents was not as warm as it should be. I went to bed worried, piling extra blankets on my bed. At 3:14 in the morning on January 12th, I woke up freezing. My bedroom was absolutely frigid. I could see my breath. I threw on a robe and ran downstairs to check the thermostat. It read 42 degrees inside the house. The furnace had died completely. I went down to the basement and looked at the furnace. It was silent and cold. I tried resetting it, checking the breakers, all the basic troubleshooting steps. Nothing worked. My furnace was dead, and it was -18 degrees outside. My first instinct was to go to the garage and get the space heater. Then I remembered. If I used it, Karen and the HOA would fine me $50 a day and potentially take legal action. But what was I supposed to do? I could not stay in a 40-degree house. In a few hours, the pipes would start freezing. Once pipes freeze and burst, you are looking at tens of thousands of dollars in damage. I called the heating repair company's emergency line. They told me they had 17 emergency calls ahead of me, and the earliest they could get someone out was late afternoon, maybe early evening. 12 to 16 hours away. I stood in my kitchen, shivering, trying to decide what to do. I could go to a hotel, but that would not stop my pipes from freezing. I could drain the water system, but that was complicated and I had never done it before. Or I could get the space heater and the generator and deal with Karen later. I chose the heater. I was not going to let my house get destroyed. because of some power-hungry HOA president and her ridiculous interpretation of the bylaws. I hauled the space heater up from the garage, set it up in my living room on the first floor, and fired up the generator outside. Within an hour, the temperature inside started climbing back up. By dawn, it was up to 58 degrees. I was exhausted, running on no sleep and pure stress when I heard the knock on my door at 8:30 that morning. I knew who it was before I opened it. Karen stood there with another woman I recognized as Linda, the HOA vice president. Karen's expression was triumphant. "Nathan, we have received reports that you are operating the prohibited equipment," Karen said. "I am here to personally witness the violation and inform you that fines will be assessed starting today." "My furnace died at 3 this morning," I said, my voice rough from exhaustion. "It is negative 20 degrees outside. I am keeping my pipes from freezing." "That is unfortunate," Karen said, though her tone suggested she did not find it unfortunate at all. "But the rules still apply. You should have drained your water system or gone to a hotel. You want me to drain my entire plumbing system in the middle of the night in a freezing house?" I asked incredulously. "Or pay for a hotel and just let my pipes freeze anyway. Those are your options," Linda chimed in. She was younger than Karen, maybe mid-40s with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. "The HOA cannot make exceptions just because circumstances are difficult." "This is not difficult circumstances," I said, my temper finally snapping. "This is a literal emergency. My house will be destroyed if I do not keep it heated." "Then you should have thought about that before installing unauthorized equipment," Karen said. "The fines are $50 per day, retroactive to when we first notified you of the violation. That is 8 weeks at $50 per day, which comes to $2,800, plus the $1,500 in legal fees we already notified you about. You now owe the HOA $4,300. I stared at her. "You cannot be serious." "Completely serious," she said. "And if you continue to operate that equipment, the daily fines will continue to accumulate. We will also be filing for a lien on your property to ensure payment." They left, and I just stood there in shock. $4,300 in fines, plus $50 for every day I needed to run the heater to keep my house from being destroyed. And they were going to put a lien on my house. I called Patricia, the property lawyer, and explained the situation. She was quiet for a long moment. "They are really going after you," she finally said. "This is aggressive even for an HOA. The problem is, technically, they can fine you for violating the bylaws. The question is whether those bylaws are being reasonably applied. In an emergency situation like this, most judges would side with the homeowner, but you would have to take it to court to find out." "How much would that cost?" I asked. "Probably around $10,000 to $15,000 if it goes all the way through," she said. "Maybe less if we can settle, but given how aggressive they are being, I would not count on a settlement." "So my options are to pay them $4,000 plus $50 a day or spend $15,000 fighting them," I said. "Basically, yes," Patricia said. "Unless they back down." "They are not going to back down," I said. I spent that day in a fog of anger and stress. The heating repair guy showed up at 4 in the afternoon and confirmed what I already knew. My furnace was dead. The heat exchanger had cracked, which was apparently a common failure point in furnaces that age. A new furnace would cost $6,000 and take 3 days to install because of supply chain issues. In the meantime, I would need to keep using the space heater and generator. "A lot of people are using space heaters right now," the technician said. "This cold snap is brutal. We have been getting calls nonstop. My HOA is fining me for using mine," I said bitterly. He looked at me like I had grown a second head. That is insane. What are you supposed to do, freeze? Apparently, I said. That evening I sat down and calculated my potential costs. $6,000 for a new furnace, $4,300 in existing HOA fines, $50 a day for the 3 days until the furnace was installed, another $150. And if I wanted to fight the HOA in court, another $10,000 to $15,000. I was looking at over $20,000 in costs because Karen Jenkins could not let go of her petty power trip. I barely slept that night. The space heater hummed away, keeping my house at a tolerable 62 degrees while the temperature outside dropped to -22. The weather forecast said the polar vortex would arrive the next day, pushing temperatures down to -35 with wind chills approaching -55. Life-threatening cold, the meteorologists kept saying. Do not go outside unless absolutely necessary. The next morning, January 13th, I woke up to a voicemail from Karen. She must have called at 7 in the morning. Nathan, this is Karen Jenkins from the HOA. I wanted to inform you that we have filed the lien against your property this morning. You have 30 days to pay the outstanding fines before we begin foreclosure proceedings. I strongly suggest you comply with the bylaws immediately to prevent further financial penalties. Thank you. Foreclosure. She was threatening to foreclose on my house over a space heater during the worst cold snap in 5 years. I was so angry I could barely think straight, and then my phone rang. It was Mike, my contractor neighbor. Nathan, you need to get over to Karen's house, he said. His voice sounded strange, almost gleeful. Her furnace just died. What? I said. Her furnace died. She is outside in her bathrobe screaming at her repair guy who just told her he cannot get to her until tomorrow at the earliest. She is freaking out. I should not have felt happy about someone else's misfortune, but I absolutely did. I threw on my winter coat and boots and walked down the street to Karen's house. She lived 4 houses down, in a large colonial-style home with perfect landscaping and one of those ridiculous decorative mailboxes. Sure enough, Karen was standing in her driveway in a bathrobe and winter coat, arguing with a guy in a work uniform. I could hear her voice before I even got close. I do not care how many emergency calls you have, she was saying. I am the president of this HOA. This entire neighborhood is my responsibility. You need to prioritize my house. Madam, I prioritize based on when people called in, the guy said patiently. You called 20 minutes ago. I have 17 people ahead of you who called yesterday or the day before. This is unacceptable, Karen said. I will be reporting your company. The repair guy just shook his head and got in his truck. He drove away, leaving Karen standing there shivering in the -30-degree temperature. That is when she saw me. Nathan, she said, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. You have that space heater. I do, I said. The one you fined me $4,000 for using. This is an emergency, she said. I need to borrow it until my furnace is fixed. I could not believe what I was hearing. You are fining me $50 a day for using it, and now you want to borrow it. This is different, she said. My furnace just failed. I need emergency heat. That is exactly what I told you 2 days ago, I said, and you threatened to foreclose on my house. Nathan, be reasonable, she said, and I could hear desperation creeping into her voice. It is -30 degrees. I cannot stay in a freezing house. Then go to a hotel, I said, throwing her own words back at her. Or drain your water system. Those were the options you gave me. I am not spending money on a hotel, she protested. But I should, I said. Or I should pay you $4,000 in fines while my house freezes. That is different, she insisted. The bylaws are garbage and you know it, I interrupted. You have been using them to harass people, and now that you need help, suddenly the rules do not matter. If you do not help me, I will increase your fines, she said, her desperation turning to anger. I will make your life miserable in this neighborhood. You are already doing that, I said. Good luck with your frozen pipes, Karen. I walked away, ignoring her shouting after me. Part of me felt bad. Nobody deserves to be in a freezing house during dangerous cold. But a much larger part of me felt vindicated. She had created this situation. She could deal with the consequences. I got home and called Patricia again. Karen's furnace just died, I told her. She wanted to borrow my space heater, the one she fined me $4,000 for using. Patricia actually laughed. You are kidding. Nope, I said. I told her to go to a hotel. She lost her mind. Okay, this changes things, Patricia said. If she is willing to use the equipment herself, that shows that her enforcement of the bylaws was arbitrary and unreasonable. We can use that if we go to court. I do not want to go to court, I said. I want her to drop the fines and leave me alone. Send her an email, Patricia suggested. Put it in writing. Offer to let her use the heater if she drops all fines and agrees in writing that backup heating equipment is allowed in the neighborhood. Get her response in writing too, whatever she says. I spent the next hour drafting the email. I kept it simple and factual. Karen, as you are now experiencing the same emergency I faced 2 days ago, I wanted to extend an offer of assistance. I will allow you to use my backup heating equipment, free of charge, on the following conditions. 1. All fines assessed against me are immediately dropped. 2. The lien filed against my property is removed. 3. The HOA agrees in writing that backup heating equipment meeting local safety codes is permitted without prior approval under the Emergency Equipment Clause. If you agree to these terms, please respond to this email and I will bring the equipment to your house within the hour. If you do not agree, then I respect your previous decision that homeowners should either go to hotels or drain their water systems during heating emergencies. Best regards, Nathan Xavier. I sent it at 11:30 in the morning. By noon, I had a response. It was not from Karen. It was from Linda, the vice president. Nathan, Karen is currently dealing with her emergency and has asked me to respond on behalf of the HOA. We cannot agree to your demands. The bylaws exist to protect property values for all homeowners, and we cannot make individual exceptions. However, in the spirit of neighborly cooperation, we would be willing to reduce your fines by 50% if you allow Karen temporary use of your equipment. Linda, I wrote back immediately. Linda, my offer stands as written. These are reasonable terms that protect all homeowners in the event of heating emergencies. I am not negotiating. Nathan, I did not get a response, but at 2 in the afternoon I got a call from Mike. Dude, you have to see this, Mike said. Karen is going house to house asking if anyone has a space heater she can borrow. She just tried my house. I told her I do not have one, but honestly, I do. I am not helping her after what she did to you. How cold is it supposed to get tonight? I asked. -35, Mike said. Wind chill of -55. They are saying it is the coldest night in 20 years. At 4 in the afternoon, Linda called me directly. Nathan, Karen's pipes are starting to freeze, she said. She needs heat now. Please be reasonable. My terms have not changed, I said. Drop the fines, remove the lien, agree that backup heating equipment is allowed. Put it in writing. The HOA board would need to vote on that, Linda said. We cannot do it today. Then have an emergency meeting, I said. You have a board member whose pipes are freezing. Seems pretty urgent to me. Nathan, people can lose their homes to frozen pipes, Linda said. Do you really want to be responsible for that? I am not responsible for anything, I said. Karen made the rules. She can live with them. I offered her a very reasonable way out. Linda hung up on me. At 5:30, as the sun was setting and the temperature was plummeting, I got another email. This one was from Karen directly. Nathan, fine. I agree to your terms. Send me the agreement and I will sign it. Please bring the heater immediately. My pipes are starting to freeze in the basement. Karen, I called Patricia. She agreed, I said. What do I do now? I will draft an agreement right now, Patricia said. Give me 30 minutes. Do not give her the heater until she signs it. Patricia was true to her word. 30 minutes later, I had a legal agreement in my email. It stated that all fines against me were dropped, the lien was removed, and that backup heating equipment meeting local safety codes was permitted in Meadowbrook Heights without prior HOA approval. It had spaces for both Karen and me to sign. I printed out 2 copies, bundled up in my heaviest winter gear, and walked down to Karen's house with the agreement and my space heater. It was dark now, and the temperature had dropped to -33 degrees. My face hurt within seconds of stepping outside, even with a balaclava on. Karen answered the door immediately. She looked terrible. Her hair was a mess. She was wearing multiple layers of clothes, and I could see her breath inside her own house. Here, I said, handing her the agreement. Sign both copies. She read through it quickly, and I could see the anger in her eyes, but she was desperate. She signed both copies, her signature shaky from the cold. I handed her one copy and kept the other. Then I gave her the space heater. You will need to run your generator, I said. Or just use regular power. This one can plug into a normal outlet, but it will use a lot of electricity. Fine, she said, grabbing the heater. Thank you. She started to close the door, but I stopped her. Karen, I hope you learned something from this, I said. Those bylaws you love so much. They hurt people. They hurt me and they hurt you. Maybe it is time to rethink how the HOA operates. Just go home, Nathan, she said tiredly. I walked back to my house, the signed agreement carefully folded in my pocket. I felt relieved but also frustrated. I had gotten what I wanted, but only because Karen had suffered too. That should not be how it worked. The next morning, January 14th, I woke up to chaos in the neighborhood. The extreme cold had caused furnace failures in 6 other houses on our street. People were desperate for heat, and the repair companies were completely overwhelmed. Several families had gone to hotels. One family had a house fire because they tried to heat their home with their oven and started a grease fire. I let 3 families borrow my space heater in rotating shifts, a few hours each, just enough to keep their pipes from freezing until they could get repairs. Word spread quickly about what had happened between me and Karen. People were angry at the HOA and angry at her specifically. On January 15th, the day of the HOA meeting, 47 homeowners showed up. Normal meetings had maybe 10 people. The community center was packed. Everyone was talking about the heating emergency and the way the HOA had handled it. Karen looked exhausted and defeated. She called the meeting to order, and immediately several people started shouting questions. Why did you fine Nathan for using emergency equipment? Are we all going to get fined if we use space heaters? You tried to foreclose on someone's house during a polar vortex. Karen tried to restore order, but it was useless. Finally, a man I did not recognize stood up. He was older, probably in his 60s, and he had the bearing of someone used to being listened to. I am Robert Mitchell, he said. I have been a homeowner here for 12 years. I am formally calling for a vote of no confidence in the current HOA board. Their actions over the past week have been unconscionable. They prioritized petty rule enforcement over homeowner safety during a life-threatening weather emergency. I move that we dissolve the current board and hold immediate elections for new leadership. The room erupted in support. Linda tried to argue that proper procedures had to be followed, that they could not just dissolve the board, but Robert had done his homework. He cited the HOA governing documents, showing that a vote of no confidence required a simple majority of homeowners present at any official meeting. We voted. 43 homeowners voted to dissolve the board. 4 voted against, including Karen and Linda. The board was done. Temporary officers were elected that night. Robert became interim president. Mike, my contractor neighbor, became interim vice president. One of the items Robert's first official acts was to suspend all architectural review requirements for emergency safety equipment. If it meets local building codes and is for emergency use, you can have it, Robert announced. No more games, no more fines. We are here to maintain the neighborhood, not to make people's lives miserable. The room applauded. I thought that would be the end of it. Karen would fade into the background. I would get my new furnace installed, and life would go back to normal. But 2 weeks later, I discovered that Karen had not learned anything at all. On February 3rd, I got a call from Robert. "Nathan, we have a problem," he said. Karen submitted bills to the HOA for reimbursement. "What kind of bills?" I asked. "Hotel bills from the night her furnace failed, emergency plumbing repairs, and the cost of her new furnace," Robert said. "She is claiming the HOA should pay for them because the board agreed to allow her backup heating equipment, but she did not have any because of HOA policies." "That is insane," I said. "She is the one who created those policies." "I know," Robert said, "but it gets worse. She is also threatening to sue the HOA, and by extension all of us as homeowners, for negligent enforcement of the bylaws. She is claiming that if the bylaws allowed emergency equipment, the HOA should have proactively informed all homeowners, and since they did not, the HOA is liable for her damages." I felt my blood pressure rising. She is going to sue us, after everything she did. "Her lawyer sent a demand letter yesterday," Robert said. "She wants $50,000. Several of us, including Robert, Mike, and me, met with Patricia to discuss our options. Patricia reviewed the demand letter and shook her head. 'This is a nuisance lawsuit,' she said. 'She has no real legal standing. The bylaws she claims to have violated were bylaws she herself enforced. She has no damages because she signed an agreement stating she was dropping all fines and agreeing that emergency equipment was allowed. She has no case.' So we ignore it?" Mike asked. "We respond formally denying her claims," Patricia said. "And we document everything. Every fine she issued, every threat she made, every interaction. If she actually files a lawsuit, we will countersue for harassment and abuse of process." We did exactly that. Patricia drafted a formal response and Robert sent it to Karen's lawyer. For a few weeks, it was quiet. Then, in early March, I found out what Karen had really been up to. Mike called me on a Saturday morning. "Nathan, you need to come to the community center. Now. Bring any documentation you have of everything that happened with Karen." "What is going on?" I asked. "Just get here," Mike said. "The police are involved." My stomach dropped. I grabbed the folder where I had kept all the HOA correspondence, the agreement Karen signed, everything, and drove to the community center. There were 2 police cars in the parking lot. Inside, I found Robert, Mike, Patricia, and 2 police officers. One was a younger guy, probably in his 30s. The other was a woman who looked like she had been a cop for a long time. "This is Nathan Xavier," Robert said when I walked in. "He is the homeowner Karen initially targeted." The female officer gestured to a chair. "Mr. Xavier, I am Detective Sarah Morrison. This is Officer James Chen. We are investigating possible criminal misconduct by Karen Jenkins related to her activities as HOA president." Criminal misconduct, I said. I thought this was just a civil matter. It was, Detective Morrison said. Until we started looking at the HOA's finances. Mr. Mitchell here became concerned when Mrs. Jenkins submitted her reimbursement request. He requested a full audit of the HOA accounts. What we found is concerning. Robert slid a stack of papers across the table to me. Karen has been embezzling from the HOA for at least 2 years, he said. Maybe longer. I looked at the documents. They showed regular transfers from the HOA account to an account in Karen's name, usually in amounts just under $1,000. Small enough to not draw immediate attention, but over time, it added up. We have identified at least $47,000 in unauthorized transfers, Detective Morrison said. Mrs. Jenkins appears to have been using HOA funds to pay for personal expenses. Landscaping at her home, a vacation to Hawaii, car payments, all sorts of things. How did nobody catch this? I asked. She was the treasurer for 3 years before becoming president, Robert explained. And as president, she still had signing authority on the accounts. She was essentially overseeing herself. When I took over, I noticed some irregularities and asked for a full audit. That is when everything came to light. We have also been contacted by several homeowners with complaints about Mrs. Jenkins' conduct, Officer Chen added. There are allegations that she selectively enforced bylaws to target homeowners she did not like, and that she used fines and threats of foreclosure to extort payments. That is exactly what she did to me, I said. I pulled out my folder and laid out everything. The initial violation notice, the demand for fines, the threat of foreclosure, Karen's request to borrow my heater, the agreement she signed, all of it. Detective Morrison reviewed everything carefully. This is helpful. Do you have the recording of the voicemail where she threatened foreclosure? I should still have it, I said, pulling out my phone. I found the voicemail and played it. Karen's voice filled the room, calm and professional as she explained that foreclosure proceedings would begin if I did not pay the fines. Over a space heater during a polar vortex, Detective Morrison said, shaking her head. That is remarkably vindictive. Over the next few weeks, the investigation expanded. More homeowners came forward with stories of harassment, excessive fines, and threats. It turned out that Karen had targeted at least a dozen families over the past 3 years, always for minor violations of obscure bylaws. She had collected over $30,000 in fines, most of which had gone into the HOA account, but some of which appeared to have been diverted to her personal account. The case against her built steadily. Embezzlement, fraud, extortion through abuse of authority. The prosecutor assigned to the case told us that Karen could be looking at serious prison time if convicted. On April 7th, Karen Jenkins was arrested at her home. The arrest was quiet, no drama, but word spread through the neighborhood within hours. People were shocked, but also relieved. The person who had made so many of our lives difficult was finally facing consequences. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, emails, testimony from multiple homeowners, the whole thing. In June, Karen pled guilty to embezzlement and fraud. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison, ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA and to the homeowners she had unlawfully fined, and banned from serving on any HOA board in Minnesota for life. On the day of her sentencing, I was sitting in the courtroom with Robert and Mike. Karen looked small and defeated in her orange jumpsuit, nothing like the confident, aggressive woman who had threatened to foreclose on my house. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she stood up. I was trying to protect property values, she said quietly. Everything I did was to make the neighborhood better. You were trying to protect your own power, the judge said sharply, and you used that power to steal from your neighbors and to make their lives miserable. This court finds your actions particularly egregious because you violated the trust placed in you by your community. You are sentenced to 3 years in the Minnesota Correctional Facility for Women. Karen was led away, and that was the last I saw of her. Life in Meadowbrook Heights improved dramatically after Karen left. Robert and the new board rewrote large sections of the bylaws, removing the vague and overly restrictive provisions that Karen had used as weapons. The architectural review process was streamlined, focused on genuine issues like structural safety and major external changes, not on things like Christmas light colors or backup heaters. My new furnace worked perfectly. I kept the space heater and generator, now officially permitted, in my basement. Several other homeowners installed backup systems too. Nobody wanted to go through another emergency like the one in January. In August, I received a check from the restitution fund. $4,300, the full amount Karen had fined me, plus interest. I deposited it and immediately donated half to a local charity that helped low-income families with heating assistance. After what I had been through, I could not imagine what it would be like to face a Minnesota winter without reliable heat and without the resources to fix it. Mike and I became good friends. We had cookouts in the summer, watched Vikings games together in the fall. The neighborhood became what it should have been all along, a place where people looked out for each other instead of looking for ways to find each other. I ran into Linda once, about a year after everything happened. She had moved out of Meadowbrook Heights shortly after Karen's arrest, embarrassed by her association with the old board. She apologized for her role in everything. "I should have stood up to her," Linda said. "I knew what she was doing was wrong, but I was afraid of her. She had this way of making you feel like you were the problem if you questioned anything." "A lot of people felt that way," I said. "That is how people like Karen gain power. They intimidate everyone around them until nobody is willing to challenge them." "I am glad you did," Linda said. "I am glad you fought back." I thought about that conversation a lot in the months that followed. I had not wanted to fight. I had just wanted to keep my house from freezing during the coldest weather Minnesota had seen in decades. But Karen's overreach had forced me into a position where I had to either surrender completely or push back hard. I was glad I pushed back, not just for myself, but for all the other homeowners who had suffered under her arbitrary rule. The space heater sat in my basement, a reminder of everything that had happened. I tested it every few months to make sure it still worked. I hoped I would never need it again, but I was glad to have it. Emergency preparedness was not about violating rules or decreasing property values. It was about basic common sense, about protecting yourself and your home from predictable dangers. And if I had learned anything from my battle with Karen Jenkins and the Meadowbrook Heights HOA, it was that common sense was something you sometimes had to fight for. Rules and regulations had their place, but they should serve people, not control them. They should protect safety and fairness, not enable petty tyrants to harass their neighbors. Minnesota winters were still brutal. The furnace still made occasional concerning noises that made me nervous. But I had backup heat, I had good neighbors, and I had an HOA board that actually cared about homeowners instead of power. That was more than enough. On the coldest night of the following winter, when the temperature dropped to -28 and the wind chill hit -45, I was sitting in my warm living room watching the news. The meteorologist was warning people to stay inside, to check on vulnerable neighbors, to make sure their heating systems were working. I glanced at the basement door, knowing the space heater was down there if I needed it, officially permitted and ready to go. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "Furnace check. Mine is good," I replied. "All good here. Stay warm." That was the neighborhood Karen had tried to control with fear and fines. Instead, it had become a place where neighbors checked on each other during dangerous weather, where people helped each other instead of threatening each other, where common sense prevailed over arbitrary rules. I settled deeper into my couch, grateful for the warmth, grateful for the community, and grateful that I had stood my ground when it mattered. The space heater in my basement might have been the catalyst for Karen's downfall, but the real story was simpler than that. People had finally had enough of being bullied, and they had done something about it. Outside, the wind howled and the temperature continued to drop. Inside, I was warm and safe, surrounded by the things I had fought to protect: my home, my rights, and my dignity. Karen Jenkins had tried to take all of that away over a piece of emergency equipment that probably cost less than she spent on her weekly manicures. Instead, she had lost everything: her position, her freedom, and her reputation. The polar vortex passed after 3 days. The temperature climbed back up to a more reasonable 15 degrees, then 20, then 30. Spring would come eventually, then summer. The cycle would continue, as it always did in Minnesota. And through it all, I would be here in my house in Meadowbrook Heights, warm and secure, knowing that I had faced down a petty tyrant and won. That space heater had saved more than just my pipes. It had exposed corruption, ended harassment, and reminded an entire neighborhood that rules are supposed to serve the people, not the other way around. And every time I saw it sitting there in my basement, reliable and ready, I smiled. It was not just a heater. It was a symbol of resistance against unreasonable authority, and a reminder that sometimes the smallest things can spark the biggest changes. Karen Jenkins had learned that lesson the hard way, in a prison cell paid for by the trust she violated and the power she abused. Meanwhile, I was home, warm and finally free from the tyranny of an HOA president who cared more about control than community. That was justice. That was fairness. And that was exactly how it should be.